Michelle, are we all good? Okay. Excellent. What? So I said 6:01 according to the clock. We all good now? Okay. Sorry, the real time is 6 o'clock. Okay. With that, I will call to order the Reno City Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, January 3rd. And I will ask Commissioner Gower to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, everybody. Michelle, can we have a roll call, please?
All right. Peter Gower.
Here.
Ed Hawkins.
Here.
John Marshall.
Here.
Paula Levis.
Here.
Kevin Weisky.
Here.
Britton Griffith is absent. Mark Johnson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Next on our agenda is public comment. This item is for either public comment or on any action item or for any general public comment. I will remind those of you in the audience who wish to make a public comment, see Michelle and fill out one of these forms. I have one for this item from Johnny Lawrence.
Hello,
And helper.
Commission. And that's my little thing right there. Girl, 2 more times, it's bedtime. We'll be looking around for support. How y'all doing today? Pledge of Allegiance said justice for all. I'm not here to... Last year I was quiet. My wife passed away the 22nd. I tried to ask for help from the city hall. Didn't get much.
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
You can
Can
pull
you
it.
zoom that down?
You can pull it over.
How do I do this? You can go a little more. Right there. I don't know if everybody could see that clearly. Okay, there we go. It is not justice for all. It is not fair for everybody, okay? It is not justice for all. And it's not fair for everybody. If you're an elected official, I think that this right here would surpass that. Even though I filed properly, you continue to say that you're not served. I don't know how this works. Do me a favor. We only got 2 minutes left. Don't be touching their shit. Shh. They're on camera. Don't do that. We're letting them read that paper. Come over here with me. Come over. There you go, baby. Goodness. I know it's not fair that everybody doesn't listen clearly, but I am so blessed to have this one that listens clearly to me, you know? I don't know who's been elected as the new, but they usually swap back and forth. The last one, they lied in their office, and this one also lied in his office. You could see clearly that they're not even going to defend this right here, that they feel that there is no violation of the Hatch Act. But yet and still, they continue to do these crazy things to me. Like, actually, I don't have the video. Like, they say that I jumped in the back of my car, jumped out like a fish, flopped around on the ground, and yet that was not abusive. I don't understand that one, but yeah, we look at this paper again, whose name is on top. Clearly, it is not fair, okay, for that individual to violate federal law, Hatch Act, deny anything in court that I filed against her, not even answer it in court, not even our city attorney answer it in court. That means that if you're elected, you could get away with these things. If you're somebody like me who served our country and is disabled, got a lot of problems going on, they don't want to hear about that. I asked for help. My wife passed away December 22nd in Oregon because they ran her out of town. Long story. We can talk about that one later, but let's get back to this. That I only can explain if nobody knows about this and it's not filed in court and they threw it out, that the clerk of the district over there threw it out. He threw it out. A judge didn't even see it. I mean, how is this fair? How is it fair that a clerk cannot give you legal advice, but yet he can perform legal duties for the mayor and the city attorney? Dumbfounds me. I used to do a whole bunch of drugs. I feel like I should stay on them because reality truly sucks. Thank you, guys. You have a good evening.
Okay, Is there anyone else wishing to make public comment under this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for item 4, which is approval of the minutes. We will start with the minutes from the Reno Planning Commission meeting on November 15th.
Commissioner Gower, move to approve.
Motion to approve.
Commissioner Hawk, second.
Mr. Gower motions to approve. Commissioner Hawkins seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And the next would be the Planning Commission minutes from December 6th.
Commissioner Gower, move to approve.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? No abstentions. Motion carries unanimously. And we will move on our agenda to item 5, City Council Liaison Reports.
Happy New Year, Planning Commission. Good to be here. Jenny Breckus, City Council member. I am here with the new liaison. We do our boards and commission reappointments every year, and Ms. Weber, the new council member for Ward 4, has taken on the liaison job to the Planning Commission so that I can be spending one Thursday afternoon a month with the Historic Resource Commission. And hate to leave, but we'll be watching from afar as I always do, and very excited that she was willing to take on and kind of be the liaison, the connection between the City Council and the Planning Commission at this important year that we have coming up. A lot of work to do together, and she asked me to come and show her the ropes of how I've kind of established the report, because unlike the other committees of ours that we're liaison to, or the special agencies, the Planning Commission one's a little different. We don't sit through your meetings because we don't participate. You're your own body, whereas I was up at the Financial Advisory Board and more or less participate in those meetings and some of the others too. So it's a little different, and I told her that I established just a process of coming in quarterly to give an update on just council perspective and more or less what we've been doing in relationship to what you've been doing. So with that, I want to thank you all for another year of service. I was just up in my office reading the postcards that come through and not seeing much work stoppage for you, at least and reading the development review memos. We really are at the heightened volume, and it's been going pretty good. And long cases, complicated cases, and hard long nights. So thank you very much for all of your work, and look forward to seeing you work again for another year. Just on a few cases, I kind of wanted to explain to Ms. Weber how I kind of update Daybreak. You all did sent Daybreak on to us, a new plan unit development. We took a different approach and denied and turned down the Daybreak project. Still has the Butler Ranch PUD on it, but that did not move forward with an approval. Just of other interest, we know you don't see annexations. That change was about in the early 2000s, I think, but we've been actually surprisingly seeing quite a few. I think it's interesting, especially since we have a out-of-date annexation plan, 7-year annexation plan, and we're getting a little old on the, had so much absorption still going on, but they're very small annexations, 2 acres here, 4 acres here, rounding out the edges, and so that's been interesting. We had a nice regional planning joint meeting with the regional planning commissioners back in December, I think it was. That was a good meeting. Looking forward to moving that process along. Hopefully, the time frame won't slip on that any longer than it already has. And Ms. Weber, who served 12 years on the county commission, has a lot of experience going back for many years in land use planning issues, and she's been appointed to be our 4th regional planning commissioner, governing board member, a place she's been before. So very excited about that. And also looking forward to our joint workshop on the zoning code coming up. I think we're going to emulate the process that we did with the master plan, probably not as as often and frequent as we did, but just, a couple touchstones of joint meetings. And I think our first one is maybe January 25th. Does that sound right to anyone? And then there's also a stakeholders group that's meeting, I think, monthly, and I'm going to try and start attending those also. Very, very focused on getting us a workable code that improves everyone's lives around here. And then lastly, just on cases, is Stonegate. I have appealed that. I will be presenting that appeal to the council next Wednesday. It's a very unique case of procedural concerns were raised to me, and those will be the heart of my appeal. So perhaps she can report back to you next time how that appeal goes. And I don't think we have anything else on the appeal forecast coming toward us in our next couple months. So that's kind of where we're at. Do you all have any questions for me on any issues, or for Ms. Weber?
Not for me.
She can handle them. So,
Commissioners, anything?
okay, great. Well, look forward to seeing you soon.
We'd like to thank you for all the time that you've spent being as our liaison. We've appreciated your quarterly updates, and we'll, I'm sure, continue to keep abreast of everything that you're going up there, and we look forward to now having Councilwoman Weber working with us. So thank you both for your service.
Thanks.
council
I
members.
think one of the things on tap will be really refining the historic preservation role and linkages within Title 18 and to the Planning Commission, the City Council. So I'm looking forward to kind of taking on that role.
Great, thank you.
I just wanted to quickly say I'm excited to be reporting with you, or reporting to you, or whatever I'm going to be doing here. I thank Jenny for her service and for being here, Councilwoman Breckus, and just look forward to working with you all and appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Have a good meeting. Thank you.
Thanks again. Okay. We'll move on to next item on our agenda, which is public hearings. We'll start with item 6.1, case number LDC 19-00020, Mayberry Lofts. And we'll start with a presentation from the applicant.
Hi, Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Mitch Gerbis. I am kind of the next generation of Gerbis Construction. My father,
Mitch,
Michael-
can you bring that microphone?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Is that better? My name is Mitch Gerbis. I'm kind of the next generation of Gerbis Construction. My father, Michael Gerbis, started the company and built Mayberry Landing, which is kind of adjacent and all around this property. So a little bit about us. So as I said, Gerbis Construction is the family-owned developer that created Mayberry Landing. And we're excited to bring the same quality construction and attention to detail to this townhome project. We've been working with the same architect, Brad Van Wert. He's been involved since the beginning with Mayberry Landing, kind of creating the forms of all the buildings. And we worked with him in this to kind of create something that was more contemporary, but also fit in with the existing development. So if those are those who are not familiar, location is on the corner of Mayberry Drive and South McCarran Boulevard. It's right behind Eclipse Pizza, those who are familiar, between Eclipse Pizza and Roygam Elementary. Here's another rendering of the exterior. As I said, we've taken effort to design something contemporary, but also fits in with the environment. Natural inspired landscaping, and the units will have mezzanines on the two center units, and then the exterior units will have roof decks on that top level. And it's 2 units, 2 buildings, 4 units per building for 8 total units. And they're all right. So each townhome will be approximately 1,900 square feet. There'll be a tandem 2-car garage on the ground floor, stucco and wood siding, and as I said, blending indoor and outdoor space with large decks and roof deck on half the units. The entire site will be landscaped. Lots of trees along the north and south frontages. All the access will be through the shopping center with existing entryways. There's one on McCarran and then one on Mayberry Drive. The entry on this driveway was just for emergency access for fire. And there'll be a couple guest parking spots as well on the site. Back in 2016, we went through and amended the handbook to allow for 9 3-story townhomes on this parcel. And we're planning to build 8 with, as I said, 2 buildings of 4 units each. And that's it. If there's any questions,
We'll get a presentation from staff, and then we'll call you back with any questions.
thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, Heather Manzo, Associate Planner for the Record. And if you would like to, Michelle, you could leave their presentation up. The quality's a little bit better. So the applicant did a really good job of outlining what request is before you this evening. It's a tentative map for an 8-unit townhome subdivision within the Mayberry Landing SPD area. And I just wanted to outline a couple of the conditions that are identified in the staff report for you. There is some existing landscaping along that western edge adjacent to Roy Gom. As you can see on the landscape plan that's on the overhead, there's a gap in landscaping, and so one of the conditions is to kind of fill that in with additional trees. Additionally, staff had some concerns. The way that circulation is going to work for this development is access is going to come through from the Mayberry Landing site, and that is identified in the SPD handbook. And so the access point that is located on Mayberry Drive is actually identified for emergency access only, and that's really due to the location of the driveways along Mayberry Drive. Having it as a full access didn't meet standards for driveway access, and so that's emergency access only. And so one of the conditions of approval has to do with the required guest parking. While the applicants identified 2 guest parking spaces, this request would only require 1. But due to the location and the one-way in and out through Mayberry Landing, staff had some concerns with how the guest parking is designed. So as a part of this request, if it's approved, the applicant will need to provide a site plan that identifies that the guest parking that's provided will meet the turn radius within the development, or have some other alternative location within the Mayberry Landing site assigned for use by this development. Staff is recommending approval of the request, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Before I open this up for public comment, I will bring it back to the commission for disclosures, starting with Commissioner Olivas.
Commissioner Olivas, I visited the site.
Commissioner Marshall, I'm familiar with the site.
Commissioner Johnson, I visited the site.
Commissioner Gower visited the site.
Commissioner Hawkins visited the site.
Commissioner Weisky, I visited the site.
Okay, thank you. This is a public comment. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak forms on this item?
Not on this item.
Is there anyone in the audience looking to make a public comment on this item? Okay, you can come up. You'll have 3 minutes. Just state your name at the podium, and when you're finished, please fill out a form over at Michelle's station there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Diana Hunt, and I live in the Edgewater neighborhood, which is just a little bit to the west of the planned place. And my concern is just about the parking. The school is right there. The shopping plaza is obviously right there. And my concern is if these people have any more than a couple of guests, there really is not any parking. There's very little on Mayberry Drive. And we live in Edgewater, so whenever there's a school event, and our kids went to the school, so we've experienced it. We used to just walk over there. But people will come into our neighborhood too to park when anything big goes on at school or in the shopping plaza. If there's a concert or some big event, there's just nowhere to park in the neighborhood. That's my concern. But that's all I wanted to say, that the parking there is very tense. And I just don't see how their guests are going to find any place to park without really causing trouble for other people in the neighborhood or for the parents who are dropping off their kids at the school. Thanks.
Thank you. Any additional public comment items? Seeing none, I'll close public comment, bring it back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heather, can you tell us, please, what the parking would be normally for 8 units with, for guest parking?
Heather Manzo, Associate Planner for the record. So the units themselves need to be parked at one parking space per bedroom. Each of the 8 units has 2 bedrooms and has a tandem garage to house both of the vehicles that are required as part of the units themselves. And then for guest parking, it's 1 parking space for every 10 units. So in this case, it would be 1 guest parking space required.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioners, additional questions? Discussion? Commissioner Marshall.
I only had one discussion point. It's just restate a ongoing complaint about the Washoe County School District letter that it's not an aggregate, it's just adding the new project to the most recent enrollment figures, and so it doesn't really tell us what the cumulative condition is that we're anticipated that's going to happen. This is not a significant concern on this project because most of the development zone for this area is already in existence, but I just wanted to raise that a concern again. That's it. Thank you.
Additional items, commissioners? Commissioner Hawkins?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I've got a hard time with finding F and G. It's bothering me about the parking in there as well as the way the traffic's going to be structured.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding, Commissioner Hawkins. You're looking at the conditions F and G
Yes,
with
under
respect to the
yeah,
parking?
Under the tentative map findings.
Okay. I guess maybe in response, one concern that I had, because I recognize that there's a parking issue there sometimes. I'm a little concerned about signage. I don't know if there's any conditions that we could put in with respect to, people driving around in that area looking for parking and then ending up in that dead-end street with no way out. I'm not sure if there's a requirement for signage to prevent that from going in there. I understand the concern about guest parking, but I guess it's also a situation where we're immediately adjacent to a parking lot. So the guest parking issue, as an existing situation, to me is maybe less of a concern because it's, there's no streets there, but there is a parking lot. Certainly that won't always work. And in the condition of, as stated by public comment with school events, it's, there's going to be issues there as well. But with respect to the findings F and G, I'm not sure that I have an issue with either of them because they're really talking about the streets and highways, and I don't think that these 8 items are going to be an issue there. I think it's more of a concern internally with circulation, but I think that can be addressed. It's already an area in there. So it's my comment there. Commissioner Gower, you look like you were reaching for your microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to respond to that too. Anyone who's been there regularly is, seen the parking issues that go on there, by Eclipse and Walden's. There's a lot of times nowhere to park. But I don't know that we can put that burden of the parking situation onto, to go above and beyond what's required for parking in this situation, which we're already proposing the amount of parking for the number of units. And we can't, in my mind, address parking concerns related to the school that's outside of the development. As a city, we can work with the community to resolve those type of concerns, but in terms of putting that burden on an applicant, I'm not necessarily comfortable with that, given the findings that Commissioner Hawkins references there, F and G. From what I've seen, the proposal before us provides the required amount of parking for the units that are proposed. Signage may be something worthwhile. Heather, I don't know if you want to respond to what the chairman brought up regarding parking. I'd be curious, signage. I'd be curious to know if there's an option there, or that's something that the city already does.
Heather Manzo, Associate Planner, again for the record. To answer your question as far as whether a condition could be placed on the project to require a sign at the Mayberry Lofts entry from the shopping center, absolutely, if the commission would like to do so, and direct staff to draft a condition to notify the shopping center patrons that access to this site is specific to that use, then we can draft language that would direct the applicant to incorporate that signage as a part of their development.
Thank you, Heather. I'll leave that to whomever makes the motion if that's a concern as well. For the
Mr.
commission.
Chairman, can I ask a quick question to Heather, please? She just,
Commissioner Weisky.
Heather, you brought something up indirectly, but is there anything to preclude the shopping center patrons from parking in these two public parking spaces that go along that are being proposed with these 8 units?
So the guest parking that's being provided, at least one of those 2 spaces is intended to serve the Mayberry Loft site itself. And so that should be reserved for the Mayberry Lofts residents.
So do
or
they
their
have some
visitors.
type of a document recorded for mutual parking?
I can turn that over to the applicant to answer that question. I
Okay.
don't know if
Because we're
they
talking
have
2 different
reciprocal-
parcel numbers, right?
Yes, we are. We're talking 2 different parcels. And I'm not sure if the Mayberry Lofts has a reciprocal parking agreement with the center itself. They do have
Okay.
reciprocal access for sure.
Thank you. Can you get the applicant to come forward, please?
Yeah, the intention is for those spots to just be for.
For the record, would you introduce yourself?
My apologies, first time doing this. My name is Mitch Gerbis. I'm the applicant for the Mayberry Loft project. So the 2 parking spots we're proposing for this site are intended solely for the townhomes, and I'm sure we'll end up putting a sign, and it's no problem. We wanted a condition for that, that we would sign them as like guest parking for the townhomes only.
So this is a private development with a private street. It's not a city street, a public street or public right-of-way, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Weisky. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for Heather. Heather, I didn't read anything in my staff report regarding waste receptacles and how they're going to maneuver in and out of that parking lot to pick up the weekly trash. Could you explain that, how that's going to work, please?
Yeah, so the garage has space to accommodate individual totes, much like a single-family development would. And they will need to meet all of the waste management requirements for the location of those totes. The applicant will need to get approval from Waste Management as far as how they'll access those with their vehicles to service the site.
Thank you.
Commissioners, additional questions or discussion or a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Weisky.
in the case of LDC 19-00020 Mayberry Lofts, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the tentative map subject to the following conditions, and I can make all of the findings. And those following conditions are conditions 1 through 11.
Thank you. I have a motion. Commissioner
I'll
Hawkins.
second that. After everything was said and done, I'll go along with what's going to happen for the development. And I'll meet all the findings.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Weisky, a second from Commissioner Hawkins. Additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Good luck with your project. Okay, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, item 6.2, case number LDC 19-00019, Pachetti Place, and we'll start with a presentation from the applicant.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Thank you, John Krompatic, with KLS Planning representing the applicant. That's Jim House and North Summit Company. Mr. House has a lot of experience in developing attached housing type product as a developer and owner of that type of real estate. Also with me this evening is John Munson with Venture Engineering. He's been involved in this in prior zoning established on the property. In addition, a civil engineer who's done a fair amount of engineering on this property. and hopefully preparing for a residential use at some point. In summary, the zone change is a existing PO to multifamily 30 on 5.99 acres. Key to this, and certainly pointed out in depth in the staff analysis, which I thought was a very straightforward, clean, well-done staff report by Ms. Reed and Ms. Hansen. MF30 conforms to the master plan designation of suburban mixed use. And then, as noted in the application and prior application of zoning, the intended use is townhomes. I know we got to look at it much bigger than that, but I think it's important with respect to what this property owner is trying to accomplish, that is part of the equation. The zoning is not needed for not for density. It is needed to allow for this use. I'm talking to townhomes without the extra provision, and I'm sure we'll get into that in more detail. There is the site to give you that's actually the better one is this one with a little bit more zoom. You can see what's going on around there. Basically, you have multifamily to the north on both sides of Offenhauser. The storage facility that's just been recently constructed adjacent to the site on the west seems to provide a nice buffer for any type of housing project that would be between that and Gateway Drive. Then to the south is that Blue Kangaroo Learning Center and some employment further east, and then of course a lot more intensive employment going to the east and south by way of South Meadows PUD and IGT just off the map on the east. There's the master plan gives you perspective on, again, adjacent master plan designations, multifamily, MX and MF to the north, and then again largely employment to the east and to the south. I think by any estimation, the parks and open space designation, which is actually Huffacre Park, adjacent on the north, provides a planning opportunity for a residential use on this property. I'll show you in a future slide. Again, there's existing PO, and then there's the proposed MF as it relates to surrounding zoning. Not required for zoning, but I wanted to show the big picture here. I think it shows, again, some commitment to what this developer and owner is hoping to do. We have townhomes proposed at 11.8 dwellings per acre. There is a secondary means of access. You can see it's going through an adjacent property, which is kind of a little grassy knoll. That's that little white space between the project and Gateway. There's been a deal struck between this property owner and that property owner to have a secondary means of access there. There is a little bit more contextual relationship to the surrounding properties, again, to the multifamily to the north. I put that little arrow on there. If I was going to be involved in this in the future, I think you have a great opportunity as a recreational component and exercise component for an existing open space and trail network that's just a stone throw away from the property. So hopefully that could be accomplished if this were to go forward. And then you can see it's a little more clarity again on the two access points that are connected to Gateway Drive and a little more contextual relationship to those employment uses to the east as well. So I think that is all I have. I will turn it over to staff and wait to hear from the commission for questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, John. We'll let you know shortly. Hi, Sienna.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. For the record, Sienna Reed, Senior Planner. John gave you a good overview of the request and a fair bit of information about a potential future project on the site. I did want to step back and point out that this is a request for a zoning map amendment. from PO to MF30. So this is a full evaluation of all of the uses that would be associated with the MF30 zoning designation and whether or not that's appropriate for the subject site. Really, the large differences between the two zoning districts are the MF multifamily use that could establish under MF30. The PO zoning designation does not currently allow for that particular use. The MF30 zoning district does have a slightly wider range of commercial uses that could potentially establish, but is still very much quite limited. And that's consistent with the professional office district that's currently on the site. I did want to point out that I forwarded via email comments from the Ward 2 NAB. This item was reviewed after the staff report was prepared in December. There were a variety of questions and comments, some of them related to access in terms of Gateway Drive, the fact that the roadway is curbing. Other comments focused on traffic generation associated with the request. It seems like there was a little bit of concern that a traffic study had not been prepared at the zone change level. I did want to point out that in your staff report, you do have trip generation estimates. Staff did take a look at what would be the trips generated from an office on the site, finding that would be approximately 120 PM peak hour trips. And then based on the maximum dwelling unit potential of 179, kind of under a multifamily use or a townhome use, what could be the trip generation, it was lower than that 120. So I did want to point that out because it seemed like that was maybe something that wasn't quite clear for the NAB and potentially to the public as well. In addition, I haven't received any comments or concerns related to this particular request. No calls have come in since the public notice went out. Staff is recommending approval of the zoning map amendment predominantly because there are figured an exhibit would help there, a variety of multifamily zoning districts in proximity to the subject site. We have uses that have developed as multifamily uses under MF14, MF21, and then also under MF30 within a half mile of the site. So we definitely have those multifamily uses in place, and then also a variety of commercial and office uses, as John pointed out, in the South Meadows 1 and 2 planned unit development, generally to the southeast of the subject site. So did want to note, again, staff is recommending approval, but certainly happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Sienna. Before I open this up for public comment, I'll ask the commissioners for disclosures, starting with Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I visited the site, spoke with the applicant's representative, and received email from Sienna.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Commissioner Gower visited the site and received the email.
Mr. Johnson, I spoke with the applicant's representative, visited the site, and received and read the email.
Commissioner Marshall, no disclosures.
Commissioner Olivas, I visited the site, spoke with the applicant's representative, and also received email.
Okay, Michelle, do we have any request to speak forms on this item?
Not for this item.
Is there anyone in the audience wishing to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment, bring it back to the commission for questions. Who'd like to get us started? Commissioner Weisky?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Sienna for answering the first question, which was trip generations, and clarifying that. John, if I could have you come forward, please. John, part of the findings that we need to make is based upon shadowing that is created. And with this proposed change, if it's approved, allows building heights to increase an additional 15 feet in height over the current zoning. How is that going to affect the setbacks and the shadowing to the existing residences to the north?
We have not analyzed it specifically yet.
But it's one of our findings.
Right. Well,
So we
if I
don't-
could accept a condition, and it's a challenge, right, with a broad range of uses and a zoning designation like this. The only one we could conform with the existing master plan was MF30.
Okay.
It would take MF14 or MF14 works. And we can't possibly limit it, which would also address your
So what
concern.
would the setback be then for PO, the way it's zoned right now? If an office building went on it and the building maximum height is 30 feet, how far south from the north property line would the building have to be?
So you're talking about just a building setback?
Yeah,
without the
just a building
shadowing
setback.
analysis. I don't know, I don't remember off the top of my head that section of code. I could check out quickly, though.
Okay. All right. Sienna, do you have that information available? I guess what my question is, does the setback increase because it's with the height increase?
For the record, Santa Reed did want to point out, just in terms of height, with the existing professional office zoning district, the maximum allowable height is 35 feet. And with the proposed MF30 zoning district, the maximum allowable height there is 10 feet. So it's just a 10-foot difference rather than a 15. And in terms of a project coming forward, we do have a section of code that limits shadowing on single-family residences as well as parks. And so we would evaluate whether or not that shadow is being cast on that residentially zoned property and parks. And we would ask for that shadowing analysis at the time at which a project is proposed. I think as noted in the staff report, the buildings, and I'll just kind of get a display map up here to show that we do have some space that already exists. But in terms of residential properties in the multifamily zone just to the north of the northern property line of the subject site, we do have an existing drive aisle, and depending on the distance, we have a range between 40 and 75 feet on those buildings already. So there is some space, as noted in the staff report, already in terms of that distance separation, and then we would verify that shadowing wouldn't be occurring when a project is brought forward. Of note, we do have not only residential adjacency because of the large lot 2.5 zoning on the eastern half of Huff Acre Park. But if the townhomes or multifamily units were to exceed 50 units, we'd also have a special use permit for that use. So this will be subject to a future discretionary review in all likelihood.
I'm sorry, is the solar shadowing just on structures or is it also on roadways and walkways?
The code reads shadow, basically structures, sorry, let me back up. Prohibits structures that exceed 35 feet in height from casting a shadow on residentially zoned property and parks between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. on December 21st.
So it's residentially zoned property, so that means that the shadowing cannot occur at the going over the property line. So the setback of whatever project would come forward in the future could not throw any shadow over the property line.
It would need to demonstrate compliance with that section of code, correct?
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Additional questions? Commissioner Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, please. John, in the staff report, page 10 of this, we're looking at finding L. Can you explain to us how we're going to meet a little bit of that affordable housing?
Finding L, you said?
Yes.
Adequate supply of housing for the community, so certainly you're adding a housing product type if we're talking about what we're hoping to do here that meets the first part of that, including the development of affordable housing. Are you talking about a government-funded affordable housing project or market rate?
No, just something that's doable.
It's the idea here is, you know, we have an awful lot of multifamily that comes forward in this community and a lot of single-family detached. You don't see, and you guys see this all the time, part of the affordability equation, and it's buyer preference type, is attached single-family, which addresses market preference and affordability. There are some extremely high-end single-family attached, but generally speaking, with attached versus detached, you get a little more density, price goes down, price per square foot.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Additional questions? Discussion items? Or a motion? Commissioner Marshall?
I can get to the right page. Where to go? There it is. In the matter of LDC 19-00019, based upon the compliance with applicable findings, I move to recommend the City Council approve the zoning map amendment by ordinance.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall.
Commissioner Gower, I'll second. I can make all the findings as well.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. This goes to City Council, so we'll move on to the next item on our agenda. Item 6.3, case number LDC 19-00021, Lithium Motors Vehicle Display Area Expansion. Start with a presentation from the applicant.
I'm a lot shorter. Good evening, Stacy Huggins for the record. I'm here on behalf of Lithium Motors. I think you are all fairly familiar with this site. You may recall, for those of you that were on the commission back in 2016, we came before the commission for an auto dealership on the bigger part of this project site. It's the actual site that we're talking about tonight is on the west side of the Lithium Motors project on the southeast corner of Kitsky and Plum. It's here with the star on it. Just a little bit of background to the property. The AC zoning on the Lithium Motors site extends into the NDOT right-of-way piece. The area that we're talking about is currently owned by NDOT. They have indicated that they no longer need that right-of-way for additional lanes and have entered into or are working on signing a lease with Lithium Motors for them to utilize that property for this project. This is just the picture on the left is was taken yesterday. It's very current. You can see that open space or that NDOT right-of-way area is not being utilized. It's dead grass. It collects a lot of trash. It's quite unsightly. As part of this project, the image on the right here is what Lithia is proposing to do with that area. It will include 20 trees along the street frontage that will tie into the landscaping plan that's part of the Lithium Motors project. It will include a drive aisle through the new area, as well as additional space to park cars just for display purposes. There will be no structures. It's just asphalt for display purposes of cars, but it's a nice opportunity to clean up the area as it exists today. The sidewalk along Kitsky and Plum will not go away, and this project will provide 33% of the site in landscaping. That's 9,000 square feet. They were only required to provide 15% of this project area in landscaping. That summarizes our request. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. We'll let you know. Heather, welcome back.
Thank you again for the record, Heather Manzo, Associate Planner. This request is, as Stacy mentioned, an extension of an existing Lithium Motors use to the east of the leased right-of-way area. The conditions of approval that are proposed or recommended for you this evening are really a carry forward of several of the conditions that were placed on the previously approved project. In addition to that, there is a condition of approval recommended that would provide some guidance as far as the trees that would be placed along the Kitski Lane right-of-way. Staff is recommending approval of this request, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Before I open it up for public comment, I'll ask once again for disclosure, starting with Commissioner Olivas.
Commissioner Olivas, I visited the site.
Commissioner Marshall, familiar with the site?
Commissioner Johnson, also familiar with the site.
Commissioner Gower, familiar with the site?
Commissioner Hawkins, familiar with the site.
Commissioner Weisky, I visited the site.
Thank you. I'll open it up for public comment. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak forms on this item?
Not on this item.
Is there anyone in the audience wishing to make a public comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Are you raising your hand to make a comment on this item? You need to come up to the microphone, state your name, and then when you're finished, I'll have you go over to see Michelle to fill out a form.
Thank you very much. This is something that
Please state your name for the record.
Excuse me?
State your name for the record, please.
Yes, sir. Wendell Stephen Smythe, S-M-Y-T-H. But on this proposal of turning that property into a future more auto display, what comes to mind is what a good job could be done and what a careless job will end up looking like. I've done a lot of landscape gardening, and a lot of people have, but it could be done. I think this should be approved, and it can look very, very nice. The end product can be very beautiful. It can be an addition to the beauty of Kitski Avenue or the beauty of Reno, and I think it should be. So if you pay a little more attention, if you will, to the quality of this land transformation, you're changing this property into a future extended auto display. If that is done properly and ethically or whatever word you would, done really nice, it can look very good. Like I remember I walked up Kitski just today and I saw one lot had real big chains on, and they're just connected by little. These little jobs can be done, can be made to look much better, and it would last 20 years.
Thank you, Wendell. See Michelle to fill out a
Sir,
form before
I
you
need
sit
you to
down.
fill out a form, please. Sir. Wendell? Please, thank you. Yeah.
Any additional public comment items on this? Seeing none, I will close public comment, bring it back to the commission for questions. Mr. Marshall?
Stacy, you said something that I didn't know if I caught it right, and it's a little different what's in our staff report. The staff report indicates that the area is leased, and did I hear you say that you haven't leased it yet?
Stacy Huggins for the record. The lease hasn't officially been signed yet, but it is being drafted. They are working on it. They just haven't signed it. They didn't want to sign it until they knew that this special use permit was approved.
Can we issue a special use permit to an applicant that doesn't have a?
Hi, Heather Manzo, Associate Planner for the record. The property owner, NDOT, has signed off on the owner's affidavit for this request. In addition to that, there is a condition of approval that would require NDOT to approve the use and the proposed improvements prior to any issuance of permits for this property.
This is a question for our legal counsel. Is that a sufficient interest to issue it SUP?
Yes, we think that's an appropriate procedure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Weisky? Nope. Additional questions? More motion, discussion, anything? Commissioner Weisky?
Mr. Chairman, in the case of LDC 19-00021 Lithium Motors Vehicle Display Area Expansion, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the special use permit subject to the following conditions, numbers 1 through 7, and I can make all the findings.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
We're going over this lithium motors. This is something we saw, the past summer? The original request?
I believe so,
Has it
2
been
years
2
ago.
years already? I just wanted to know if this, if it's in conjunction with the other one, if all the conditions apply from that original request to this one right now.
Heather Manzo, Associate Planner. To answer your question, yes, the conditions of approval that were placed on the previous project that would be applicable to this one have been carried forward, which include construction hours, the use of outdoor speakers and things to that effect. Those have been carried into this entitlement.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gower, second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Good luck with your project. We'll move on to item 6.4, case number LDC 19-00017, Bella Vista Ranch Phase 2 PUD amendment. And we'll start with a presentation from the applicant.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, for the record, can you hear me? I guess I got to lean over this. For the record, Randy Walter with Places Consulting. I'm here representing the Corona Cyan LLC group and their request for amendment to their existing PUD. If you look at the overhead, I'll kind of walk you through where this project is. At the upper northwest corner of the project is the current dead end of South Meadows Parkway. If you're familiar with that area, you know how it dead ends at Steamboat Creek. That's the northwest corner of the project. The far south end is an extension of Rio Wrangler that dead ends into the south end of the property. So that generally, at least geographically, gives you an idea where it sits. Property zone PUD, as you see, the Cyan project and the Bella Vista Ranch Phase 1 to the west is zone PUD, as is Dumani to the south. Daybreak to the north would have been zone PUD, but it's been denied. That's where this project sits. It was originally approved back in 2013, had 77.4 acres. Of that acreage, 178,600 of it was commercial, which I'll get to in a minute, and 575 dwelling units. 35 acres, a little over 35 acres, was open space, which is almost half of the project. This is really a minor amendment. The applicant has two different amendments that are incorporated into it. The main reason for the initial amendment is the elimination of the Sage Hill Gun Club, which has been closed and been remediated. Originally, Village C, which has a star on it, was designated residential. Because of the gun club, the staff and planning commission felt it was more appropriate if we zone that property or designate that property for commercial uses rather than residential. As a practical matter, this property has a lot more variability from a residential standpoint than a commercial standpoint. So this amendment is to convert it back to residential because the gun club is basically closed and will, for all practical purposes, have to remain closed, given everything, all the work that's been done to remediate the site for lead. The second portion of it is to reduce the overall density from 30 dwelling units per acre to 20 dwelling units per acre. The net result of those two changes is a reduction in total ADT of almost 8,000 trips a day. It increases the unit count to 137, but again, the units are a more affordable side, higher density, which I'll get to in a minute. But as a practical matter, the reduction in ADT takes this project that was originally approved as a project of regional significance because of traffic and reduces it down to not a project of regional significance because it no longer meets the traffic component. That reduction is a huge reduction compared to what it could have been if it's developed as commercial, which was originally planned for the Village C component of it. To give you another idea, AM peak hour is reduced to 30% of what was originally approved. PM peak hour is only 10% of what was originally approved. So this amendment has a significant reduction in the intensity of development on this project, on this property. Some things that staff has asked us to do to update the PUD to bring it more into conformance with current policy includes an update to the wildlife fencing language to match current policy, which we've done. Basically, as you know, the fencing would be required at the time of construction, and the permanent fencing would be installed after completion of construction to maintain a separation between the wildlife and the urban development. This is on page 46 of your PUD. Staff has also asked us to update the affordable housing component of it. There's really three portions to the affordable housing portion of this PUD. It's affordable by design. We've created a lower end density that's basically 6 dwelling units per acre, which will make sure that the housing that is constructed is a more affordable side of the housing. Basically, the missing middle portion that you've heard about from regional and other places. We've in turn made sure that that is the low end of the density that could be built on this property. Multifamily density, which obviously creates a significant, more affordable housing component. At 20 units per acre, this could be developed as a multifamily project fairly easily. And the third component is to add to the affordable housing component, just from a citywide basis, is to allow for a donation to the Housing Trust Fund. We did a draft agreement that's kind of been talked about. Maybe staff can elaborate a little bit more on it because they'll know more about the status of it than I do. But basically, it's a per unit contribution to an affordable housing component within the city, and the city could determine where those funds can be used and applied to the areas that have the most need and the most demand for affordable housing. So those are the three components that we've added to the PUD. Some other more minor components, reduction in turf. If you look at pages 22, 23, 27, 28, 37, and 44, we basically eliminated the turf requirement in the handbook, but these are all public right-of-ways or public open spaces. So the turf would be eliminated from that component. And in completion of the PUD, staff has requested that we put a completion date on it. Staff has 15 years in the staff report. We'd like to request 20 years. The client's perspective is this project was originally approved without a timeline on it. He doesn't have a problem with the 20 years. He'd rather see that versus the 15, and that's on page 16. With that, I'll be happy to answer any other questions after you've had a chance to have a staff review the component as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Brooke, good evening.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Brooke Oswald, Associate Planner for the record. If you can turn on the overhead, Michelle. Let's see if I can. So I just want to clarify a few things. I have had 3 public comments. I had 2 phone calls that I spoke with each person about, explained the project a little bit more. Both of them looking for more information, had some concerns about traffic, overall densities. I did receive 1 email in opposition to the project. There was a NAB. We did have a NAB meeting on this. They did not make quorum that night, and so there were no NAB comments received that evening, nor could they have discussion on the topic that night. So this is going from, currently we have 575 residential units. The proposal is to increase that to 712. Those will, Village C is the commercial area adjacent to the gun club, as Randy mentioned, that is being proposed to be converted to 20 units per acre. Additionally, the Village A and Village B currently in the handbook are at 30 units per acre, and they are proposing that those be reduced to 20 units per acre. We've also, was quickly mentioned, we put a minimum on that of 6 units per acre on those developments there, similar as you saw with the proposal for Daybreak having a minimum. The commercial area adjacent to the gun club is 16.4 acres. So we're seeing a reduction in those other 2 units or those other 2 villages by a couple hundred, and we're seeing an increase in that 16 acres, and that is about 328 units there. So we're kind of shaving off some, and we're adding in on that 16 acres. Once again, just looking at the site as a whole and the aerials showing the previous gun club there, just to clarify, in the initial handbook, those concerns about the proximity to the gun club were the major reason that commercial Staff recommended commercial be in that area as a more compatible use to that gun club. That gun club has since been retired. I have spoke with the building department manager and verified that there has been a demolition permit issued on that. The buildings have been cleared from the site, and that they have worked with the county for remediation of the lead and other materials on that site. So that site has been cleaned up, is currently vacant, and no gun club activities. So looking at, just to clarify that a little bit more, the gun club is this parcel here with this development being here. This is the overall land use plan for Damani Ranch in that area. Damani Ranch, that is a mixed residential area. It does allow some minor commercial uses. A gun club is not one of them. The city of Reno also does not allow outdoor gun clubs. We only allow indoor gun ranges. At this time, the Damani Ranch does not even allow an indoor gun range in this area. Staff's analysis would predict that we would not see a gun club use coming back into that area. We currently do not have a city SUP or any sort of entitlement on that for that area. This is just a letter that was received after the staff report was submitted. Just verifies from a consultant that they have done the remediation, that they are closing down that gun club, and it's not expected, nor will it reopen. Looking at, staff also analyzed looking at that commercial portion and the loss of that commercial portion, its proximity to residences in there, and really the feasibility of that commercial and proximity to housing and others. As you can see, I've demonstrated a 2-mile radius from approximately the commercial portion of that site. As you can see, much of that is hillside or private land, fairly hilly, potentially could be developed in the future, but would probably be lower residential, that area. Currently, no development there. As you can see, as we move out to that 2-mile, our large commercial area really sits along our highway corridor, and that's where we start to see a lot of our planned services from mixed employment areas to our retail and other things throughout that. So that area out there is largely PUDs, so those are within the PUDs that is being handled. And this is looking at it from a master plan level, and how we currently have it master planned out in that way. So we are seeing the commercial here, some mixed development, and then predominantly this is all residential development within that area. Looking at other possible future development sites, we would look for those arterial commercial to be really located at cross intersections of major interfares, so that Veterans South Meadow would be a possible where we would possibly see development there. As you saw before, the Daybreak proposal did propose something commercial area and some community and neighborhood commercial in that area. That is currently has a master plan zoning of unincorporated transition. That zoning, or that master plan designation, is looked to change as utilities. It is annexed into the city and a number of things. As we discussed in the Daybreak, that property is at a point that we would look to the master plan and rezoning of that property as that move forward. And as was mentioned, we did change, sort of to update that. There were other things that staff looked at as staff had worked a lot with the horse advocates and through the Daybreak project, and looking at what is appropriate and the fencing and how we start to work with the feral horse population and our city interface, coming to that fence, that the NRS fence, and building those. Within that, we've also asked that the HOA maintains that fence line. They are responsible and need to maintain that. The thought being that does pull back from or does take the responsibility off of currently who is handling it, which are the horse advocates, and lets them spend their time and resources on other issues, if that is providing water on the hill or moving horses or providing other things. And so that's sort of how the staff is approaching the issue with the horses. Secondly, we did the reduction of turf, both for the wise use of water and water landscapes. Additionally, the green areas and turf areas tend to attract the horses in those areas, and we have seen many conflicts, and that is a potential way that we can help to reduce that risk between that. Thirdly, we did do the timeline. Staff did recommend 20 years or 15 years, as the applicant has proposed 20 years. It doesn't, as was mentioned, that was not previously in the handbook. It is something we are looking to do. That does offer the city council the opportunity to, if that isn't fully developed, to look at that appropriateness of that PUD at that time and make a decision if that should go to a strict zoning or if that PUD should be extended. So it does give us another look at that and not an entitlement in perpetuity. Third is that affordable housing. Once again, sort of coming to the concept of what Daybreak was. There is currently nothing in the PUD that addresses affordable housing. It just comes back on our current code, which we don't have anything written on that. So we did take sort of that same approach that we did with Daybreak, looking at sort of the density that could happen there, but looking at that donation to a third fund. We have provided a condition that prior to the certification of this plan unit development, that agreement would need to be formalized and ready for council to approve. With that, staff can make all the findings as far as the PUD, the zoning map, and the master plan amendment, and does recommend that the Planning Commission recommend approval to City Council of the project. I am available for any more questions if needed.
Okay. Thank you, Brooke. We'll start for public comment with disclosures. Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I received an email on this, and I'm familiar with the site. Thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins, familiar with the site?
Commissioner Gower received the email and have previously visited the site.
Commissioner Johnson, as did I.
Commissioner Marshall, no disclosures.
Commissioner Levis, I received email and visited the site.
Okay, I will now open it up for public comment. I have one request to speak for him on this item from Tracy Wilson.
Good evening, Tracy Wilson. I am both a community member that lives about a mile away from the south end of this site, as well as a volunteer with Hidden Valley Wild Horse Protection Fund. My comments are pretty much geared just towards the fencing issues, as the planner discussed some of that. Initially, the proposal had access to water at the north end of the site, which has been removed, and my understanding, what I've been told on that, is because it's no longer owned by this site anymore. That was part of Daybreak, and that's not up to them. So fencing is something that we really want to see go in before these developments start, because that blocks the horses from access. We don't have horses coming through construction areas onto busy streets where they cause horse vehicle accidents. However, in this particular place, the water creek that goes through there, the horses that are on that land, regardless of where they came from or how long they've been there, we have several generations of horses that have been born in that area. They know only that water source, and actually that food source in spring and summer of the green grasses that grow along that water source, that wetlands area. And while certainly they can adjust to new areas, if we go in there and just put up a fence and block them without providing some sort of alternative water source or leading them to an alternative water source, what you're going to find is desperate horses who are going to try to push through a fence. A horse that has an easier way to go somewhere else isn't going to worry about, they're just going to walk on somewhere else. But if they don't know somewhere else, they're going to find a way through that fence. And what we don't want to see is that happening. We don't want to see horses on the streets. What would be ideal for us is to see the city the developers, the landowners, work with the advocates on developing either a temporary water source just beyond this property, or even the landowners farther up the hill with a permanent water source, and then potentially a short-term diversionary feed program that allows us to go in and lead them away from that area, so they're led to a new water source, and then that feed eventually drops off, and they start using that water source as their radius for where they go out and seek out their feed. That would be ideal. I guess what I'm just trying to say is that some creative planning needs to go into this before we just walk out there and put up fences and fence, several hundred horses off of the only water source that they know, because that's going to create some other issues that nobody's going to want to deal with. But the fencing overall is absolutely necessary. So I'm not here saying that we don't need the fencing. We absolutely need the fencing. I just think there needs to be some creative thought into how that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Michelle, do we have any other request to speak forms on this item?
No, I do not.
Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to make public comment on this agenda item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions. Who'd like to get us started? Mr. Marshall?
Brooke, thank you for including that graphic. I had talked to Brooke earlier today about concerns I had with the traffic analysis and the fact that we're converting a potential commercial area that could draw traffic nearby into that area, and just looking at trips is not adequate, I think, for determining the impact of this change from commercial to residential. Brooke, were you able to do any sort of analysis? Would you mind putting that graphic up? And I kind of understand that, I guess from the city's staff perspective, is the loss of the commercial here not significant because it's just inappropriate, it was inappropriately placed in the first place? Is that
Correct.
kind of the underlying
It is,
theme?
with the gun club being there, that is, looking through the history of this project, that initially wanted to be, or they wanted to have that as residential. It was recommended because of that use next to the gun club that it was commercial. It does sit, that will be the extension of Rio Wrangler to South Meadows. A lot of times when we're looking at commercial, arterial commercial, they often work well. We're looking for those intersection points, or those points where we can have a higher volume. That also provides better access, better accessibility, higher visibility, some of those other things that are attractive. So even though the commercial is there, the viability of that commercial could be harder in its location. And it's really, as you see the proximity where it's being up against the hillside there, it really has half the circle. Whereas as you start to move that, you create a larger boundary for your commercial area to draw from and support.
But doesn't that, because of the distance to other commercial, doesn't that make that commercial, I don't want to call it a node because it not really is a node, but that commercial area more valuable in terms of walkability, reduction of VMT, other things that we're concerned about. So that's, that it's not that it's inappropriately placed, but as a result of losing it, are we converting potentially the opportunity to shorten trips in the future? I suppose was my concern on that. I don't know.
Without doing a thorough analysis of that and the market research and what would be entailed in the viability, it is hard to predict that. You need to, your commercial areas need to work to be walkable. They need to, businesses need to locate there and that. And so without doing that market, I'm not in a position to speak if it would increase that or decrease that or how that would be handled.
Okay. I'm going to move on to other things. Anyone else want to question on that topic?
Mr. Chairman, may I jump,
Commissioner Weisky.
piggyback on that, please? Because Brooke, that's the concern that I have, is losing this commercial.
Certainly.
And in doing so, and I believe it was maybe the map that you put up after this, it might have been 2 maps later, it showed some multifamily use even going up farther on the hill where the gun club sits now. If I remember that. It was a purple rectangles.
So is this the one?
That's
So
the one,
this-
yes.
This is the land use plan for the Demani Ranch PUD.
Okay,
So they run adjacent up in that area. That is a mixed residential. There are commercial uses allowed in that. As you can see, that runs down into a lot of that area where we start to see some of that commercial and some of those activities happening. Currently, that portion here is largely undeveloped land. We would look that it would probably develop in the future as residential, or it potentially could have commercial uses in that area.
okay, so what's the roadway system gonna be like up there? I mean, what we see right now is we keep seeing development after development using smaller roadways, not four-lane arterials like I would consider Veterans Parkway. I don't see any of that being proposed going up into the hills in here. So how are we going to have major intersections where our arterial commercial can be brought in or commercial development, yet we're compounding and adding residential units in these areas? And I'm trying to get a handle on, your map right now shows that commercial is a mile away, but there's another mile maybe of development going east of that. Now that's 2 miles away. So our carbon footprint is increasing. Our trips are increasing. Smaller roadways. There's a lot of things changing, and I'm not sure how staff is looking at this because I look at it differently. To me, this commercial should be there and remain there for the future, not for what's 2019 is, but maybe 2029. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So how did you justify the removal of the commercial based upon my long dissertation?
Yeah, looking at, when staff analyzed this, we looked at the potential extension of South Meadows Parkway, of where that could go to that Sunny Hills development or what happens there. There's nothing currently booked on that, but that certainly could happen there. Coming down into that intersection of Veterans and South Meadows being 2 major arterial roads, that identification of that around that area and that being formed there, that would probably be a more appropriate place for that. Looking at some of the trail connections and pathway connections, and some of that will be established through the development, that would be within walkable distance and walkable area in that way. Also looking at general impacts of that neighborhood, that Rio Wrangler into South Meadows is currently, it is a linear strip. We're not looking at any other cross. It is, you come in Rio Wrangler and you enter out South Meadows, and you really don't have any cross streets until you're much, much further down in that way. And so that impact on those surrounding neighborhoods potentially could be rather large, as was shown in the traffic study, of it going from that over 8,000 trips per day to down around 1,000. So we really looked at those overall impacts, the appropriateness of the commercial in that area, and proximity of other areas which could support commercial and larger commercial as we move forward.
Okay, but we're talking about this parcel and this application that is before us, and that's the only one that we have control over.
Certainly.
Right?
Yes.
It's not, I mean, my question is, how does this play into our master plan? Because our master plan was developed around this being commercial.
Correct. So the master.
And that's a major chunk of this is being taken out as commercial, is what is being asked.
Certainly, about the 16 acres, 170 square feet of potential commercial space. The master plan on that area is currently a special planning area. It doesn't have a designated master plan. That's when it was analyzed, it was really looked at because of that, that area could go from 1 unit per acre to 30 units per acre, could have commercial. It doesn't fit with any of our specific master plans. So it is a unique area when it came in as that initial PUD, or with the PUD with that master plan. And as we updated that master plan, special planning area was really what could be applied there because of that diversity of how that was initially laid out. You know, as far as losing the commercial, certainly it is a concern, and that commercial, I think also looking at the viability of that commercial and the impacts that commercial could have, that was really why staff leaned towards the residential and that ability to potentially have other commercial in more appropriate locations.
So what I just heard you say, and this is my interpretation only, I'll make that clear, is that staff thought about this and it's the next best thing if they want to remove commercial from the table.
I would not put it that way, but the proposal for housing units, reduction of that density, overall impact to surrounding neighborhoods, appropriateness of location of that commercial, those were the items that were looked at.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. I'll turn it back to Commissioner Marshall now.
Actually, you provided a good transition, Brooke, when you talked about reduction in density, and I'd like to talk about the reduction. Actually, would you mind putting up a map that has the A, B, and C? So if I understand what's happening, and I think you used the word shaved, but essentially we're shaving density off of Village A and Village B and shifting it to C. So overall, the numbers basically stay the same in terms of total potential.
There's about 125 more units. It goes from 575 to 712, so 137 units. In addition to what is currently there as residential units. And so we will see an overall density reduction of Village A and Village B, and then that same density being applied to Village C, so of the 20 per acre. So consistency of the densities along those three villages.
Why are we reducing the density from 30 to 20?
I believe that was it was the proposal that was given by the applicant. Looking at, I think, the reduction of those trip hours, probably the product type, appropriateness of the product type in that area. It is located up against the foothills and some of that, and possibly looking at heavier multifamily being located elsewhere. It still does allow for that up to our 20, which would be our multifamily 21 zone, but they have pulled back from the intensity and density along that corridor there. When staff analyzed that, we did look at it as an overall reduction, once again, of that impact, but looking at a consistency of housing types, that it is a smaller parcel. It is a PUD, but it sits at approximately, I believe, 70 acres, with 40% of that being 45% in open space and wetlands. So it is a smaller developable area, and that consistency along that was something that we considered as we looked at this.
So we're getting rid of commercial and we're reducing density.
Correct.
And we only have a minimum of, you're setting the handbook a minimum of 6 units per acre?
Right, which would come out to about 7,000 acre lots, or 7,000 square foot lots, 7,200 square foot lots.
Okay, I'm going to shift to horses if somebody else wants to talk about anything else or on that subject. This is page 46 of the proposed handbook, and the edits it used to say the proposed fencing, this is on fencing, page 46. The proposed fencing is noted below will keep horses away from conflicts with other uses. And that's the keep horses away is deleted, and we've added promote the safety of future residents. I think there's a misspelling there you may want to look at, as well as the feral horses. And it seems to me you're shifting the purpose of the fencing away from keeping the horses away from conflicts to promote the safety of future residents.
I think the way that we've looked at in many of the discussions that we have, those are the concerns we have. We have concerns about residents and we have concerns about the horses. And as we approach this, I think taking both of those in hand is important. We do have conflicts, potential deaths, other things that are associated with the horses within our neighborhoods. And so the residents are a concern, and as working for the city, that is our concern. The feral horses are under the control of the Department of Agriculture. We don't have control of them, nor can we. The state law states that you have, the right that you have is to build a fence to keep them out. It is a fence-out state. And so the way that is written is to basically say, we want to protect the horses, and we want to work in the welfare of the horses, and understanding that the fence is a critical part of that, and to the safety of our residents, especially as we densify and continue to grow.
Thank you. On the next page, on page 47, the whole water section is deleted. And I had flagged this, but also our public commenter noted this. Can you explain to me how, so what we're doing, this was once, I guess, a handbook for a larger piece, or this developer had?
The developer had control of the property on the other side of Steamboat there. And so the way that it is written, the water access is currently not on their property nor under their control. It is someone else's property at this point. And so within the handbook, we cannot dictate what someone else does with their property. So that was stricken and was removed. As was stated and continue to move forward is the goal of both the city, I believe, and the horse advocates is to move that those watering sources further away from the city interface and within our city. There is that conflict of that timeline that it's going to take to do that. And as development comes in and as we're seeing development pressure, that access to water will become challenging as we see that. And so we currently, I could not have the current language in there because it's not under their control. So we did not put another access because the long-term goal is to actually move those watering sources away from that city interface.
Okay, so for the Daybreak is just north, right?
Well, the proposed Daybreak project, that would be the southeast portion of that project, over where the aggregate pits and a number of that are. That butts up to that north portion of Steamboat there.
So, right. So was there any, I take it then, therefore there was no part of the Daybreak handbook, and I can't remember this section of it, that had to do with providing access to water for the reasons that you just stated?
Correct.
So the net effect of this is for both Daybreak and for Bella Vista here, we're losing a requirement to provide a watering access for wild horses.
We will be, yes. So they're on that upside. So currently where that is owned by the Daybreak. That property, it does have a large lot residential zoning on that. It currently does have a zoning map amendment in to go to SF6. Could, through those tentative maps or how that moved forward, that could be negotiated of providing water where they currently is on that Daybreak property and was proposed through this development.
Thank you. I'm going to shift to affordable housing.
Commissioner Marshall, before you go into that, I just broke to back up a half step because I'm seeing where Commissioner Marshall's questions are at, but I just want to clarify for myself. When I look at the proposed wildlife interface plan that's here on page 46, it appears, at least to me, that the fencing that's proposed is around villages A, B, and C, but stop short of South Meadows Parkway. So the access may not be direct through, but according to what I'm seeing, at least in this handbook, the access to Steamboat Creek north of Village A, and to some extent, depending on the development of the South Meadows Parkway access over that, there is still access to the creek It's just around this development rather than through it. Am I understanding that
The
correctly?
access that is proposed to the water, in the handbook to the water, is currently still available. There are no development plans on that. They are moving forward, that Daybreak Group is moving forward with proposing a zone change in that area, and probably will pursue development in that area. But currently, the access is still provided there, down through that area.
Okay.
So to move the fence, they would be able to access Steamboat on the north side of Steamboat Parkway, or South Meadows Parkway, excuse me.
Okay, thank you, Brooke. I see you raising your hand, but Brooke has answered my question for me, so I don't need to call you up to the thing. I appreciate that. Commissioner Marshall, I'll turn it back over to you.
Any other horse questions? I'm going to go to affordable housing.
One horse question for you.
Yes.
Brooke. We're not going to run into the same situation with the cattle guards as we did up by Gold Mine and in the south end of the developments down
No,
there.
the city has taken a sort of a different approach on that now. We will, as development comes in and we have those places where we interface with the Virginia Range or that exterior, we would allow for cattle guards. They would be more of your traditional cattle guard. We also, preference is also for that to be gated and cattle guard. Anything within the interior, we would not create a situation within that interior of neighborhoods where we do have cattle guards again. If we looked at development moved past the current fence line or that, those cattle guards would be removed and taken to the perimeter areas to provide access to those other lands.
And you, as well as staff, has been in contact with Hidden Valley Horse Association?
I have worked with Shannon and some of the horse advocates on how we would move forward with that, and have been working since, through the initial removal of those that were on the interior of the Lennar property up until Daybreak, and then continuing, we'll continue to work with them.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that question, does that need to be spelled out, Brooke, in a PUD handbook that, because I see on page 46, there's an indication that there's going to be a cattle guard sort of on that northeast portion of the site there. Does that need to be spelled out that it will be moved at some point?
As they came in, as Rio Wrangler was continued, if, the Daybreak or that development happens on that would be removed. I don't believe that needs to be spelled out. It would be that perimeter as development came in and we saw the construction, the NRS fence going in prior to that construction, we would remove that guard at that time as the roadway and that happened. So I don't believe that it is required that we remove that guard on this, nor do that. It would become a public road, and we would have.
I'm going to jump in, Claudia
Yeah.
Hansen, Planning Manager. If it's specified that there's a horse guard there, it needs to stay there in the
it does.
handbook, or there needs to be an amendment to the handbook down the line. So if the intent is to move that, then that needs to be spelled out in the handbook.
Thank you.
Commissioner Marshall. Okay.
I'm just going to, while he's writing that down, the applicant is here too, if you want to have any specific questions for the applicant and their proposal.
Thanks, Brooke. Brooke, you put up a segment on affordable housing.
Yes.
That had a number 1 beside it, which is different than what's in the handbook on page 54. And so that's just a modification to.
This is a condition that we would put forward, is that prior to the approval or certification of this handbook, amendment to the handbook, that we would need to have an agreement in place for that affordable housing donation.
Okay, so that's in addition to the language that's not replacing the language that's in page 54.
So it's just conditioned that we do have it stated within the handbook, but it would be required, we would be required to have that in place prior to this being approved, that we'd actually have an agreement that could be enforceable.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, additional questions? Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we get the applicants come forward, please? Good evening, Mr. Wallen. Page 14 of our staff report under findings, number 2, paragraph C. It says is basically no modification, removal, or release of the provisions of the plan by the city or county is permitted except upon a finding by the city or county following a public hearing that it is not granted solely to confer a private benefit upon any person. How do you want me to make that finding?
I'm not exactly sure I even know what the intent of the finding is. I believe the intent is that whatever decisions you make is to the general benefit of the community as a whole, not to a particular piece of property or a particular owner of a piece of property. I believe that the PUD that's in front of you that was originally approved, as well as the amendment to it, provides a significant amount of community benefit for a variety of reasons, including affordable housing, and as a benefit to a significantly larger number than just a single individual.
Including taking away a work-live condition by removing the commercial and just making it a live only.
Let me talk a little bit about the commercial side, because I think there may be some misconception of what that commercial area actually could be. When we originally proposed this project back in 2012, at this point, it was residential. It was residential for a reason. And that reason is the viability of a commercial facility like you're talking about, retail, the type of commercial that generates walkable trips, community trips, is very unlikely in that location. There's virtually no support from a residential side to support any kind of retail that would comply with the kind of resident or the kind of commercial that you're anticipating. The kind of commercial that we looked at on this particular piece of property was more of a service-oriented commercial, more wholesale, not intended to be a trip generation by pedestrians at all. And that's the only kind of commercial that's really viable in this location based on the market analysis that we did back in 2012.
Okay.
Just so you know, it's commercial, but it's not the kind of commercial that would generate live, work, trip kinds of components that you're anticipating. It's not in a location that would generate that. It's not in a location that would provide for that kinds of facility. As your staff mentioned, the location at Veterans Parkway in South Meadows is a much more appropriate location for that.
But their application is not before us tonight.
Understood, but I'm just telling you from a master plan standpoint, that is a much more viable location than this particular location, which doesn't have an intersection at all. It has a minor 2-lane arterial for frontage, and that's it.
Okay, and I agree with that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you,
while I'm
Mr.
up here?
Chair.
If I could kind of clarify something that staff and you folks have been talking about is
Actually,
access to water.
at this point, we're asking questions, so we might get back to you on that, but Commissioner Gower.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to follow up on the questions that Commissioner Weisky had. And my concern, Randy, is that, we could argue the viability of commercial in this area and whether it fits, whether it's appropriate from a master plan level. Yes, no, I think we could do that all night from 6 different perspectives. My concern is regarding the information that's contained in Exhibit C related to the traffic update letter and the difference in trips that's being proposed. How are you or Paul Salegi reconciling the amount of trips that could be captured with the type of commercial that you're saying is viable or not viable? Because that's kind of the crux of the matter for this particular item, is the traffic pro-con that's coming in or out of the PUD based on the type of use that's within it, right? So how is that being reconciled? Because I'm not seeing it in Paul's exhibit here.
Yeah, Paul's traffic analysis looks at it from the standpoint of what would generally the general commercial designation is not really determined what type of commercial it is. It's a general interpretation of ITE. And that's what the trip generation is based off of. That trip generation incorporates pass-by trips, incorporates origin destination trips, as well as generation trips. So it does all of it. It's just kind of in a composite amount based on square footage. That's how they calculate it and compute it. So that's where it comes from. So it anticipates all of those potential operations. It comes with kind of an average trip. Now, if you had a specific type of use, if you had a specific retail use or commercial use where you could actually determine what those trips were, then you have a much better analysis here. We don't know what those are. We don't know if that's possible. So that it's more of a general approach to it. And the reduction in trips is just simply the difference between residential trips from a more of a mid-range residential density to typical general commercial.
And I understand that, and I've seen a lot of Paul's reports. So in terms of a traffic engineering perspective, trips, plus and minus, I mean, that's kind of the black and white of it. But there's a planning component to it, is that the conversion of uses from commercial to residential and the loss of that commercial use in an area where there could be trip capture, I'm just not seeing that here, and making the findings that we have to make. Feel like there's a piece of information missing, that if we're adding this number of residential units, number one, it could create not necessarily the number of trips, but the type and the direction of the trips, you know, particularly coming down South Meadows Parkway. And then that combined with the loss of, you know, a commercial, I mean, I would venture to call it a node. Commissioner Marshall didn't want to go there, but I think it could be. You know, that loss from a master plan perspective, that beyond this PUD could capture trips in nearby areas. So those two components, I don't feel like are being captured in the directionality of the trips and the potential impacts on area roadways that are components of the master plan findings that we have to make.
If I can help with that kind of understanding, the only potential trip capture that you could create with a commercial area there is the trips that are going to and from on Rio Wrangler Parkway. The trips that would use Rio Wrangler Parkway are going to typically go on Rio Wrangler Parkway for one of two reasons. One, to get to South Meadows, which gives you the east-west major arterial connection, or two, get you to some facilities that are on that component. The number of trips that could be generated from, at this point, it'd be Debani, because that's where the residential trips would be coming from, up that arterial, is going to be split, because at some point, those trips are going to go the other direction because there's other attractions the other direction. So you're not going to have as many trips because you don't have as many residential units going in that direction. So that origin destination is important. And you have to realize that those trips that are on Rio Wrangler Parkway in this location are limited in terms of how many there's going to be. So the capture's limited because of the geography and what's being used to get to that facility. Does that make sense from a planning perspective?
It does, and you know, I think there's two perspectives that you could come at it. It's the point in time, the static perspective of what we're looking at with this proposal, but then there's the down the road perspective and the potential for new development beyond it, going up that hillside, and what would be the capture potential of that commercial. For that new residential development. I mean, we can say there might be new commercial in Daybreak, but Daybreak got shot down by city council. So Daybreak right now is off the table. This is the only commercial that's on the books right now in this area. And again, I feel like we could argue this, and I'm getting into the position of, you know, debating the planning components of it, but all I'm saying is that I'm not seeing it in the traffic study. It just seems too black and white for me to understand what the real plus and minuses are.
And I've attended.
And your answers have been fine. I'm kind of getting into discussion, so I'm going to stop there and turn it over to the chairman to
Mr.
take
Chairman,
us from
can I
there.
ask one last question to Randy, please?
Sure,
Commissioner
Commissioner
Weisky.
Weisky.
Randy, Development A hasn't been built yet, right?
Correct.
And neither has B. And so
Correct.
South Meadows Parkway, as a 4-lane road, could be extended and brought down to the area of this commercial with a redesign, right?
If there was any traffic orientation that would require that, yes.
So if the commercial stayed in place, then that could be access and it would take it off of Rio Wrangler.
For the northern portion of Rio Wrangler, it wouldn't take it off from the southern portion of Rio Wrangler.
Right, but I mean, most people aren't going to use the southern portion if it's not wide enough and it's not a nice 4-lane road like South Meadows is.
Correct. The other thing you need to
So-
realize is that that component of South Meadows Parkway as a 4-lane facility is a 4-lane facility.
Okay, but here's what I hear you asking, or your client asking us to do, is to change and get rid of commercial because it doesn't suit with what they're doing now, but it did 6 years ago when the original design was put together, and that's why there was a component of commercial in it. And to me, and this goes back to what Commissioner Gower was saying about you're going to have 6 different opinions up here maybe, but there's some give and take in here, and it could work, except that you're only bringing one direction forward tonight with no options.
And typically, that's how we put a PUD together. It's how
So
we set
then,
the thing
so
up to
then we
start
just
with.
look at it as black or white, yes or no.
Keep in mind that this particular project, when we originally submitted this PUD, was submitted as all residential. There was never any intent to put commercial there. The only reason the commercial was installed in part of the PUD is because the gun club was in place and we were not allowed to put residential in that location.
Okay.
So
I hear you. I understand.
And as a practical matter, we did a market study to try to get an idea whether that commercial had any viability whatsoever. And as a result of that, unfortunately, that's not here now, and it's also 10 years old. So as a practical matter, that analysis said it has no viability from a retail perspective, has no viability from a customer-based type of thing. It has viability from a service center, more wholesale-based type of facility. That's the extent of what was available.
Okay.
That's just.
And it's
the
great
decision was
conversation, and I appreciate your explanation of that, Randy. I really do. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Weisky. Additional questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have one more question, Randy, before you sit down. What is the justification for 20 years versus 15 years?
I'm glad you asked that question. When we did the 30 dwelling units per acre, and again, given the timeline of when it was, back in 2012, because that's where we were, we really had no concept of what was possible from a marketing standpoint in terms of residential. We tried to get the maximum density we could get at that time. It looked like a better multifamily piece than it did mid-range residential, the missing middle residential, if you will. In today's market, it looks like the missing middle residential is a more viable alternative for it. The other component of it is if you look at the property, its configuration, it's not a nice rectangle. It's very skinny, it's very oblong, it's very unsquare, if you will. And as a result of that, that's going to have a major impact on what you actually can build on the property. So we said, let's be realistic about what a maximum density could be that would be reasonable, 3-story walk-up apartments, that type of thing. And 20 is about the best you're going to be able to do on that piece of property. So that's kind of where we set that top end. So we had a physical reason for doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Additional questions for either Randy or Brooke? Mr. Hawkins?
Mine's for discussion.
Okay.
I'll hold my peace for a minute.
All right, additional questions before we move into discussion? If not, I'm going to turn it right back to you, Commissioner Hawkins, and let you get us started.
looking at the word on page 15 of the staff report with the NRS minute order number 3, the ratio of residential to non-residential use in the planned unit development. I made a mistake one time 2 months ago when Commissioner Weisky went with the new master plan because some general office or PO wanted to get approved. And Commissioner Weisky put it like it was, the master plan that's in front of us right now, as we talked about it, we need to reserve all our industrial and all our commercial assets so we can use those in the future, not by doing what we're doing tonight. So that will be my only comment on this, and that I can't make finding 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. Additional discussion items? Mr. Gower.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just to continue on the questioning that I think Commissioner Marshall and Commissioner Weisky were on the same line in terms of their questions, but you know, as I mentioned, mine was specifically related to the traffic, and to make the findings, I just as a point of information that's available to support decision making, didn't feel like there was the level of analysis provided relative to the traffic and the conversion of the uses that is the fundamental component of this proposal. So that influences just my level of confidence in being able to make the findings. You know, I think we can, as I mentioned, debate the viability or the appropriateness of uses in areas at the master plan level all day. I mean, if Daybreak does come forward and is approved at some point, there is a pretty substantial, commercial component to it, which would fill that gap in that area. Whether it would be walkable or not is debatable, but there would be a commercial component in the area. But again, like I said, my just level of confidence based on traffic, which was a fundamental issue for me going into this item, looking at it, that information just wasn't there.
Mr. Marshall.
Yeah, I would like to echo Peter's comments. I think, to me, that what stuck out as a sore thumb was that it was a kind of somewhat of an incomplete picture of the overall change, what we're looking at, and looked at it very narrowly in terms of just the change in use, not the actual, perhaps, larger scope planning change, not just for the uses within this particular piece of property, but the traffic patterns surrounding it. And I agree that with the demise of Daybreak, maybe at this point, this is not an appropriate move to make because of the absence of any other commercial within the area, and it may become less of an issue if Daybreak and those commercial nodes actually makes it through at some point. I also, the shifting of the density from 30 to 20 is bothersome to me, just because it may not change. I mean, I don't know if it's going to change the actual outcome of what's put on the ground, but it is a reduction of maximum density, and which, although the total unit count goes up, that does change potentially the product that's being contemplated if those higher numbers actually drive a more dense development. On the one hand, I want to promote density, but on the other hand, we're talking about right on the edge of probably the most viable outer development. I don't know, going up the slope, what can be put out there. But then that kind of runs into the horse issues that I have some issues with in terms of the changes in the master plan, or excuse me, the PUD handbook that seem to shift the focus of the purpose of the fencing and the provisions. Even though I understand that we may not want to bring the horses into that area for watering, they did have a water source, and now as a result of the developer's sale or loss of control or whatever it is of the Daybreak side, and then taking out of this handbook, seems like we have lost something that nothing is provided in replace of it in terms of access to water. So for those reasons, presently I can't support the proposal, or that's my thinking. I'd love to hear what the people's thoughts on the basic planning exchange that we're talking about here.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Weisky, I would just very briefly like to say that I agree with Commissioner Marshall, Commissioner Gower, and Commissioner Hawkins regarding traffic and giving up the commercial component at this time. Because we're looking at no other commercial development in the area. I think that there are some other options that could be presented and brought forward with an amendment in this PUD handbook that may reduce the amount of commercial area, but not eliminate it, and in a different location, make it viable as the project that is, could be brought forward relatively soon, for whatever reason, could reduce some of the traffic in the area. And I listened to what the applicant's representative said tonight, Randy, and I understand exactly what he's saying, but I'm looking at this from a planning perspective and the future, and we know that Daybreak doesn't exist as it was presented to us last year. It doesn't exist. Yes, it's under appeal. City Council changed an opinion. So I'm just looking at what is presented to us tonight in the staff report, and I therefore I'm not going to say which way I'll vote based on a motion, because we don't have a motion, but based upon staff's recommendation, I cannot go along with staff's recommendation right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Weisky. I'll weigh in myself. I think it's an interesting, I like Commissioner Gower's point about all of us can debate the merits of this from a planning standpoint. I guess I look at this much in the same way that everybody else is, but I hearken back even to when we were putting information together for the latest master plan. And there was a lot of conversation about, walkability, and the fact that while we may not have it, that seemed to be a very strong desire, and we've certainly tailored the master plan towards that. Here we have an existing plan unit development that in its concept does that. It has different levels of residential, it has a commercial component, it's located with open space and connecting to other things. I think you make a great point, Commissioner Weisky, about, the viability of some option of this, but what's presented to us tonight eliminates the commercial in its entirety. I think there's nothing, the last page of this, every non-residential use is stricken from what we're looking at here. And I would, viability aside, I think the intent of the planning process and the master plan that we have is to encourage that type of development. And so for us to now, going right to Commissioner Hawkins' comments on item 3, the ratio of residential to non-residential use in the plan unit development, we have an existing plan unit development that has a ratio that, while maybe it's not the best ratio, eliminating it in its entirety does create, there is no ratio. So I think from that standpoint, I think there's a better solution to this than what we're seeing here. So if there's additional discussion, I'd like to hear it. Otherwise, I'm looking for a motion on this item.
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion. Case of LDC 19-00017 Bella Vista Ranch Phase 2 PUD development, based upon non-compliance with the applicable findings, in particular finding number 3 under the master plan. I recommend that the Planning Commission do not recommend approval to the City Council for the amendment to the Bella Vista Ranch Phase 2 design guidelines.
Commissioner Weisky, I will second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second on the table. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries for recommendation, a non-approval to City Council. Did I state that right? Okay, thank you. Okay. Moving on to item number 7, Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Liaison Report.
Received an email from Kim today that she's trying to get a meeting set up for the 9th of January at 5 o'clock. So you guys should be receiving a email anytime.
A meeting just for the regional.
TMRPA, yes.
Commissioner Hawkins, the 9th meeting was the cancellation notice. And then the meeting, the notice from Kim was doodle poll for the joint meeting options, I think, at the end of the month.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Didn't get that one.
Joint
Thanks.
RPC, RPGB.
Okay.
Great. Item number 8, staff announcements.
Claudia Hanson, Planning Manager. Very little since everybody's kind of been on vacation for a couple weeks. We haven't had a city council meeting since the last time you've met. Just a reminder that on the 29th, we will be having the joint Planning Commission City Council meeting with Clarion, our Title 18 consultant here, to be going over their memo and the overall direction of the Title 18 update. So staff is very much looking forward to that, to getting good, solid direction, so that we know we're going the right direction, and then we don't come back to you with 6 months with an ordinance and you go, that's not what we wanted. So it's very critical that you give us the appropriate comments and direction on the questions that come before you on the 29th, and we are looking forward to that. That's all I have.
Just as a follow-up on that, Claudia, is there any, are we going to be looking at information on that kind of in the same time frame of a couple days beforehand, or will there be any individual presentations or discussion opportunity prior to that presentation?
Yes, we're going to get you there's a memo coming from Clarion that will come out on the regular packet schedule. We're going to get it to you early so you can see the bulk of it ahead of time, and then you'll get the packet later.
Okay.
But we'll get it to you. I think we're getting the final draft on Tuesday. So once staff gets through that, we'll get it out to you.
Okay, great. I think that would be helpful to get you the information that you want.
Yes. Thank you.
Item number 9, Commissioner suggestions for future agenda items. Seeing none. Oh, wait, Commissioner Gower, sorry. I was looking the other way.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a suggestion for any future agenda items, but just wanted to maybe request or get a sense of when some of the requested items are going to land on the agenda.
Yeah, we've got for future agenda items, staying on the agenda item. We have Michelle School District at our next meeting, I believe, second meeting in January. Yes, and then Chief Cochran is coming back. He's giving a presentation to City Council. He's going to go to them first and then come to you. So I don't know if it's the second meeting in February or first meeting in March, but Chief Cochran will be coming to answer the questions that you asked of him. And
Update on ozone advance from air quality.
yes, we have that. We have a tentative date on that. I want to say that's in March. I think that one's in March. I'll double check, but that one's coming up.
And then Greg was going to give us an update relative to the findings for an SUP, the applicability, if it's just specific to the item before us or if, it's more broadly applied. I think there was some discussion on that.
Didn't you also ask for an item on, within the transit, in the Todd corridor or?
Title 18, that's,
Yeah, we talked about that night. That's
You
going to
can
be
move that
addressed in
in
Title
Title
18.
18.
got to keep my mouth shut, and item number 9 is what I...
Man. All right, item number 10, public comment. This item is for either public comment on any action item or for any general public comment. Michelle, do we have any request to speak forms on this item?
I do not.
Is there anyone in the audience wishing to make a public comment?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Weisky?
happy birthday.
Thank you. That's an appropriate public comment for the end of the night.
Too late.
Yeah.
My mic was on.
I appreciate that. Okay, item number 11. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Have a motion? Good night. Thanks, everyone. Happy New Year.